All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. We got 20 folks, so that's good enough critical. 21. Good enough critical mass to get going. Appreciate everyone being here for it's a third meeting of phase 2A or whatever we're calling this. And just as a reminder, I am recording this. And the video will be up on the Public Utility Law Judge website after I downloaded it and after the meeting I downloaded. So I've got a few things to talk about today. Really not many comments. We just got some stuff from Al Bartlett and a little bit from Paul Verchinsky. So why don't we start with the template? Ethan or Jacob, do you guys want to walk us through some of the changes that you made to the draft template?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Trying to find my controls here. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Let me see if I can display that window.
Do I need to give you the?
I think I have it.
Okay.
Right,
we
yes.
got it.
Okay, good. All right. Good morning, everyone. So we mainly just went through and tried to clarify the. It's very strange. I have two versions of this up on my screen, and I'm reaching for the wrong one with my cursor. So excuse me if I do poorly. We went through and just tried to clarify things like which pieces go with the Al suggested categories so that people know what they're reading. Clarification of, this is the narrative, and then clarification of some of the data. And some people missed that, for instance, BG&E in this case does not do CVR at the substation level, and it is a different concept or different method of going about it. We do it at the feeder level, and that is explained here in the narrative. We also went through and, using DeAndre's suggestions, went through and provided how the how this narrative meets staff's recommendations, so that we, identifying that it's all in here. It may not be as broken out and identified in the individual pieces, but what we are going to go for is to be provide as much information as possible. And then here we've gone ahead and explained the connection to the project goal, or project to the goal, and described, per staff's recommendation, made it clear that this CVR, because it reduces, for instance, CVR reduces the amount of energy being used by customers, and it's in an odd way. It reduces the voltage, but not the energy delivered, and it's just it's one of those neat tricks of physics that electrical engineers can do this, and it reduces the amount of energy total needed, and that means to deliver the same energy, and that results in a reduction in emissions from the source, which is PJM markets in this case. Again, went through and identified where the staff recommendations, how these various sections meet them. And again, these sections are all directly from the Climate Solution Now Act. This is these are the 11 categories for reporting that come from the Climate Solutions Now Act. And we did the same process with the load forecasting, distributed energy resources and load forecasting system project, which is a meeting anticipated increases in load. This is a system that changes our forecasting. And there's been a lot of talk in this work group, interest in utilities having more granular and more predictive load forecasting regarding DERs. And that's exactly what this application does that we describe here, the Distributed Energy Resource and Load Forecasting, or DER and LF system project. That's exactly what it does, and it is an advancement we are working through at all of the Exelon companies. This is the example from BG&E, and it connects to many of the CSNA goals. Made a few clarifications here, just so that people could clarify the language. And then, describing that this is how it would be monitored. The monitoring in this case is simply a timeline. This is a IT application, really, and at the end of the day, its implementation is its rollout. There will be, a testing period, the period of configuration and calibration, where we will be making sure that it works correctly, and that if things don't work, we would be letting people know, for instance, in this to monitoring, that these dates have been pushed out as we recalibrate the software to get more accurate results, because we are going to be comparing what this forecasting does compared to reality to see how well it works. And other than that, that is pretty much what we did. We simply annotated with staff recommendations and tried to clarify. I would like to say that this is a really good example of where we are going to be soon. And this was discussed by the SMEs at the DSP Technical Conference. Paul DeMartini specifically, and I got to tell you, I've been following Paul DeMartini's work since 2018. He is really one of the original grid mod thinkers. He has a lot of experience with implementing these kind of processes across the country. And one of the things that he has observed and mentioned in that meeting was that there comes a point where stakeholders have asked for transparency, the utilities begin providing it, and then you run into the technical level of what the utilities provide. And that's why he recommended technical conferences as a really great place and a forum where utilities can get the feedback and directly work with stakeholders to help them understand. And for instance, I'm deeply embedded in utility thinking. For me, it was just a given that CVR reduces energy use, and therefore there would be an energy reduction. Totally missed that I should have written it better. And that's how, and making that clear connection is exactly the kind of thing that we're going to be doing through the course of the technical conference, and as we work with you all on the stakeholder engagement part of the transparency and stakeholder feedback that are required under the CSNA and that we've been working on here. So I really consider this a good exercise as far as getting some information back and understanding how we need to be clear, and getting you ready for the next stage of all this, which is the stakeholder engagement, where we can actually start implementing this. And one final thing I'd like to note, these narratives were put together pretty quickly. And the CVR one was entirely put together by me based on some existing reporting I found. These will be, the reporting we will do in November will be put together first by the SMEs, and then people like me will go through, Jacob and I, and edit a little and try to clarify, ask questions, and there will be a process internally more than what this result gave you. And so I expect those narratives to be clear and the descriptions to be more detailed. More data will be available because we'll have more time to think about it. But this also gets to we are at the point where we need to begin developing these after Labor Day, and we need to get to writing these and getting this report ready for the commission for filing on November 15th so that we have a fulsome report for you to react to and for the commission to use to inform. So I hope that was helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions, comments, but we're here to try to help.
Thanks, Ethan. Before you click off there, I think the only response we got back in relation to the template comments was from Al, and that seemed like it was more narrative type issues. It didn't seem like they were very substantive. Is that fair to say?
I think so, and that was exactly what prompted me to talk about the technical conference.
Okay.
And Paul DiMartini was, he was very good about saying that we will get to this point, and we're there, and that's
Okay.
I think that's a good thing. It shows that our process is working.
Okay, good. All right. So with that, are there any other questions or concerns with the utilities draft template, or can we put this one to bed? All right, go ahead, DeAndre.
Good morning. Thanks, Chuck. My question is more so along the lines of tracking. I see the monitoring section. Does this include monitoring all of these separate programs or initiatives?
Yeah, this was what Al Bartlett recommended, just to make it clear what different sections are doing. And monitoring is the kind of where the metrics, the roadmap, the milestones will be included.
So that's the milestones and the progress being made.
Correct.
Okay.
And maybe as I mentioned, as things change, that's where we'll, there was a software failure. This did not work out the way we expected. We're going to change that timeline as we readjust it. It's where we'll inform people of how progress is made.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thank you, DeAndre.
All right. Anyone else? Okay. I think we got us a template. All right. Next. The utility straw man. Is that all right? Well, obviously Ethan's happy about that. And Jacob, are you doing the straw man, sir?
Sure, I can talk through that one.
All right, thank you.
The template. I can share my screen as well.
Okay.
Give me a second.
Take your time.
So based on previous conversations, based on the commission order, we really look to update the straw proposal to incorporate the concept of the annual technical conference that the commission had laid out. So as we were kind of looking through the straw proposal that we had put forth, there felt like a pretty natural location for it. But just to recap for everyone, kind of what the straw proposal included. Step one was utilities doing some level of data collection, working with stakeholders, having some type of stakeholder meeting to collect some of the inputs that would go into the evaluation. Step two is then publishing and aligning on inputs and assumptions. And again, looking for stakeholder feedback here.
Hey, Jacob, do you want questions as you go, or you want to wait till the end?
People can ask as they go. Yeah,
okay.
That's fine.
On step one, public engagement. I know you said some type of meeting. Do you have any thoughts or ideas at this time as to how that those meetings or notifications might occur?
Yeah, I think that one, I think there's obviously a lot of different ways that could go. And I think that's something that would leave to like some level of flexibility for the utilities. I think it would make sense that the utilities report out on what process they ultimately followed. But I think it's helpful for the utilities to be able to identify what pathway works best for them. Whether it's, I think we have listed here some type of informal RFI, if they, prefer more of kind of a meeting approach. But that's kind of how I was thinking about it, is allowing the utilities to define that. And then, that would be published and captured of the approach they took.
All right. Thank you.
So again, step two, looking to publish those inputs and assumptions, looking for stakeholder feedback there, to be able to then inform the utilities as they go to run the analysis, right? So the more that there can be kind of discussion and alignment with stakeholders before the analysis is run, hopefully there's more alignment once the analysis is run and we see those results. and there's less rework done. So step 3 would be the utilities running the analysis. Step 4 is the utilities then publishing their distribution system plan. And this is, again, really trying to capture what went into the plan, what were the goals that were incorporated into it, aspects of the DER and the load forecast, the hosting capacity analysis, the system assessment, what grid needs were identified, what possible solutions were considered. A piece of this as well we are incorporating is having the utilities publish their kind of utility roadmap, which starts to overlap with the template, which I know the template's specific to the General Assembly reporting, but the idea with the roadmap is there's probably similar information in these sections, and we can probably talk further about like how could we sync these up to make it so it's not duplicative. But the idea is utilities are talking about how we're continuing to approve. Obviously, we kind of redlined out the part that was the non-consensus, recognizing the order from the commission, and then a new step 5, which is where we felt the technical conference best fit. So basically, the utilities would publish and file their DSP plan. This would fit naturally into the technical conference, where the utilities can then present on these topics, present both on the process that they went through to get there, as well as the final kind of DSP plan, lessons learned from previous cycles. All these different aspects can be included in the utilities presentation.
Hey, Jacob, oh God, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
But before you move on to the next page, in step 5, right above load forecasts, you've got utility response to feedback received in steps 1 and 2. But step 4, it looked like you guys were also looking for feedback on the published DSP. So I was just wondering if the utilities intended to provide responses to the feedback received in step 4. That's all, because you just have 1 and 2 specified. That's all.
Yeah, I would say yes, the utilities will look to respond to that. I think the way we were thinking about it is, given that the technical conference would create an avenue for the commission and stakeholders to also provide comments on the plan in a slightly different setting, that responses to that would kind of happen after the technical conference.
Okay. All right. Would it make more, well, I know you're providing a summary of the feedback. I guess maybe to the, well, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm just thinking out loud. The
Sure.
Best way to provide feedback to the step 4. But go ahead, sir.
Yeah. So in terms of how we think of the feedback from stakeholders within the technical conference, obviously the commission has the ability to provide an order, as they outlined in their order on this phase, and then parties. I believe the plan is, as I read the docket order, was that there'd be established DSP dockets. Parties would be able to file comments within the dockets. Parties within the technical conference, I would assume, would have a space to be able to provide verbal comments. And so based on all of that kind of combined, that would be kind of some of the stakeholder feedback for the utilities. And then step 6 is the consideration of that feedback. So we've gotten feedback on the plan, whether it's through an order, comments, etc. The utilities would then evaluate that feedback and identify what can be incorporated. And then, as we had already, this was, from the previous straw proposal, so this isn't new, but the utilities after that would then publish some type of response to, the appropriate stakeholder feedback. Reasonable stakeholder feedback, including what was proposed and evaluated and some of those reasoning. So that was the thought of that stakeholder feedback from 4 and 5 would kind of all get kind of bundled together. Utilities would kind of reevaluate and, bring that consideration back in step 6.
Go ahead, DeAndre.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks. Thank you for the presentation, Jacob. A question. Between steps 3, running the analysis, and step 4, the publishing of the DSP and receiving feedback, if you're publishing, it says publish DSP. Is that what phase of the DSP is this? Are you publishing at step 4? Because I think there's an opportunity between 3 and 4 to, and maybe I'm, and you can fill me in, an opportunity to screen possible third-party developers to provide input for solutions that you're posting. And 4, I'm assuming 4, if you're publishing a DSP, you've determined solutions and everything in between.
Sure. So as we've thought about, and as I think we talked about during the last phase, we see step 4 kind of being utilities would run that analysis, identify all those constraints. As we did identify here, we'd be publishing the constraints that have changed since the last plan and some of those kind of prospective solutions for those system constraints, right? So as we're publishing this plan, this is the utilities publishing what they're beginning to think about in terms of those solutions. And that's where, we're looking for those third-party developer feedback to be able to say, hey, you identified this constraint, you've identified what you're considering as a potential solution. That's then their opportunity to be able to kind of provide those, that feedback on those solutions and on those constraints. And then, like I said, that all then gets kind of incorporated into the feedback and analysis cycle that the utilities do in terms of evaluating all that feedback, and then incorporating that feedback or not incorporating that feedback, right? Going through that process of evaluating and determining how should the plan adjust appropriately based on that feedback moving forward. So that was how we were thinking about it. Is it makes sense as we start to identify those constraints to start to put out some initial thoughts on potential solutions, and then receive feedback there.
So step 4, you're publishing the constraints and results of your forecast and evaluation of your system, or you're publishing a DSP? And have those previous steps been taken before you publish the DSP? I'm trying to understand, because I don't see it on the strawman that you have here.
Right. So the published DSP is capturing all of these boxes within the JADE process, right? So part of that DSP is going to be looking at publishing what considerations fed into the projections, what goals and objectives were incorporated, the DER and load forecast that was done, any hosting capacity analysis or system assessment and grids needs that were done, starting to identify those possible solutions and beginning to screen and evaluate them. So all those JADE process steps are a part of this DSP that would be published by the utilities, right? So this is all same as what we talked about the last phase. None of this was redlined, updated recently, but this is all that we'd be looking to publish within the DSP document.
I think I'm missing. I don't see a narrative or a step where you all are publishing the constraints, maybe requesting RFPs to address any constraints that you feel are appropriate to be addressed by third-party developers or NWS, non-wire solutions, or things of that sort. To publish or make available the results of your forecast and your needs assessment in order to inform stakeholders and others of possibilities or opportunities to provide assistance in addressing any constraints. And then after getting those RFPs or requests where appropriate, and evaluating which of those solutions will work, I think then would follow a DSP published plan as to how you all are planning to address those things.
Yeah, DeAndre, I think, at least as I've been thinking about it, there's a couple aspects to that. I think first, non-wire solutions are tools in all the utilities toolboxes, or I should at least speak specifically for the Exelon utilities. So as we are doing that initial evaluation of those constraints, that is already a consideration that we're taking into account, right? So when we say here, right, prospective solutions, that may be already a non-wire solution identified by the utility, because that may be what best fits that constraint, right? And so that initial evaluation is done, and I think going through some type of RFP to procure that would be kind of its own unique process. And so I think that's an important consideration here, is that that initial evaluation is being done there by the utility. And I also think, as I mentioned before, by publishing what we're thinking here, it gives parties to an opportunity to provide feedback of, hey, have you considered this alternative, right? So in a way, we're very much, putting this out there for that feedback from folks, to be able to say, here's some considerations or other alternatives for how you're approaching this. And so I think this is the avenue where we're certainly looking for that feedback.
So if I'm understanding, DeAndre, I think you're kind of looking for some type of publication or notice to the stakeholders of the, I guess, like the system constraints. Is that, and so third-party developers could get involved before they see the actual DSP, the actual plan? Is that what you're trying to get at? And
correct me if I'm wrong, utilities can correct me. A published DSP, I see as a final roadmap to addressing constraints. So my impression is that there was a step prior to that in evaluating solutions if you're publishing a DSP. So the question is, was bringing more transparency to that evaluation of grid needs, and while also addressing stakeholder engagement, or integrating stakeholder engagement in providing solutions to those grid needs where appropriate. Now, again, this is up to the utility to determine where these constraints are and the appropriateness of using DERs or non-wire solutions to address these constraints based on safety and reliability of the system. And so when I see published DSP, I'm thinking this is a final plan that may be up for feedback, but there have been solutions that have been vetted, which included some possible solutions offered or evaluated from third-party developers. And the publishing is the publishing of the constraints in order to solicit those developers or others that can help address the needs.
If I may clarify, if you look at the section B, what is included in the published DSP, remember there's going to be a year zero, and this is year zero, and we're going to publish a state of where things are, and there was not sufficient time to run an RFP for near-term constraints. And most of those, frankly, aren't going to be an RFP, because non-wire solutions take a certain amount of time for a certain amount of build out, probably 2 to 3 years. Add in an RFP, that's generally another 6 to 8 months. So the first year, we're going to be saying, these are the constraints we'll be dealing with immediately through load transfers, through feeder extensions, very simple. But also, if you look at, we're going to be, if you look at this list, we're actually going to be saying, we're going to be forecasting out to beyond the construction plan, and those are the ones where we're going to be will be a lot more amenable to stakeholder feedback, new ideas coming in, because when you're talking about near term, it means the system needs to be addressed immediately in order to meet customer load. And adding in an RFP, when especially for a project that we probably aren't going to do an RFP for anyway, because it wouldn't be, a wire solution is going to be massively cheaper, 500,000 rather than a minimum of like 3 to 5 million. Those are going to be pretty easy ones for us to take down, and part of our bread and butter work. So in my view of how this reads, that's how this is just year zero, and we're already telling people what's out in the future and giving them, and we'll be publishing this on our website and making it available, and that will give developers an idea of where to start going. And if they want to propose solutions, great. If they want to do a customer-sided solution and place a DER in there, and the result is it changes our load forecast in the future, that's great too. But this is putting that information out there, and at some point though, we have to start at year zero, and there's not going to be an opportunity to revise our construction plan, which is already in the MYP, and just to have an RFP that probably would be unsuccessful.
And just to add to that real quick, I think an important thing to remember with DSP, to Ethan's point about starting with year zero and going, is distribution system planning is a iterative process, right? It's an evolving process. There's not going to be a final DSP, because that's always getting revised and updated, and it evolves, right? And so the idea here is that we're publishing what it is at this time and looking for that feedback, and then, as like Ethan said, as that continues to evolve year over year, that information, that feedback can be incorporated into those future iterations of the distribution system plan. But it's not a final product that we're then executing this 10-year plan. It's getting revised and updated every year as this data evolves and the information evolves. And so I think that's something important to kind of keep in mind here as well, and why we didn't necessarily frame it as publishing the final DSP is because it's this iteration of the distribution system plan.
All right, Garrett.
Thanks, Judge. Garrett Fitzgerald with Montgomery County. And very much appreciate DeAndre raising this issue. I mean, this is the main issue I think that we're concerned about over here is inherently we're making some hopefully pretty substantial improvements to the DSP process generally. We're still left with some realities that, I mean, as I see it, that utilities inherently have more of a self-interest in investing in traditional infrastructure than the stuff behind the meter, for obvious financial reasons. And I'm glad that we're taking more of this into consideration. But
I would disagree with that completely.
Say more.
There is no reason why we would not invest in non-wire solutions. They are, in fact, generally more expensive than wire solutions. If we had a financial, if we were, in fact, influenced financially, we would be putting storage out there on everything because it costs more than wires. We'd still make capital return on it, and it is usually the storage solution is going to be a much higher. It's going to be a magnitude of dollars greater than a wire solution. I can do a load switch for $250,000. That's removing a large number of customers from one feeder to another, so that they're more evened out if one feeder is becoming overloaded. I can do a feeder extension for between $500,000 to $1 million. A battery starts at $3 million for around 500 kilowatts. And the battery systems we have out on our system are 1 to 5, and they've cost us up to $10 million. I did note that in their comments in the OPC strawman, OPC made the proposed that we were opposed to non-wire solutions for capital reasons, and their statement there was absolutely incorrect and not at all reflective of how rate of return or the cost of non-wire solutions is actually compares to wire solutions. I disagree completely that we have a financial incentive against non-wire solutions. What we have is a BCA problem. They don't often benefit cost analysis compared to alternatives. They don't often win.
Right.
And that's just the reality of it. And, you know, I've done RFPs. I've designed an RFP for a non-wire solution. I have 2 battery projects that I've done the went through the construction and watched the BCAs slip as construction realities intervened. Those 2 storage projects were only justified by 10 miles of underground feeder, which is at $1 million a mile, which is the rule of thumb in the industry for undergrounding, and it's actually much worse now. That was a 2010 figure. You know, that's the kind of situation where a non-wire solution will beat a wire solution, but those are few and far between.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ethan. And I think, and obviously the examples you're talking about are primarily front of the meter. I do think there are things that, you know, we got to look at. How do is the BCA appropriately designed, and are there tweaks? And I imagine, you know, as we kind of have additional societal priorities over time, you know, there will be evolution to these things. But I'm also thinking about some of the behind the meter stuff. I think, you know, we've seen, you know, we have a strong interest in seeing a lot of behind the meter cold climate heat pumps, for example. And we've seen some good analysis that makes it pretty clear that if we can see enough really efficient equipment going into buildings behind the meter, it may be potential to mitigate the need for certain investments in front of the meter, whether traditional wire solutions or non-wire solutions. You know, that there's some opportunities there, right? And
I'm going to have to disagree again. Cold climate heat pumps are going to shift from gas infrastructure to electric infrastructure and we've already looked at it, and it will result in us having winter peaks on some of our feeders. It will increase load on the electric side by decreasing load on the gas side.
Yes, but if you were making the baseline assumption that I'm starting with, which is that we're going to shift to electricity, we'd rather see cold climate heat pumps than non-cold climate heat pumps. There is an energy gain, even though, I mean, the peak shift is because we're going to electrify, and the opportunity to reduce some of the future grid investment is by making sure that we're using the most efficient stuff possible behind the meter rather than less efficient stuff that is also electric behind the meter. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not trying to, you know, disagree with you on this, but
I just don't understand how cold climate heat pumps, they're still a net increase in load for us. They're a plus. They require more infrastructure, not less. So
the point that I'm trying to make is that it feels to at least some of us who do not work for utilities that there's potential for DERs in some cases to potentially help, if depending on the combination of investment that societally we might make in things the utility doesn't actually own. There may be potential to impact the amount of investment that we collectively need to make in investments that would flow through the utilities. And I think that's an issue that obviously we still need to wrestle with some more. We saw very different proposals, for example, from utilities and in the Empower plans and the rate cases earlier, when we were looking at if we could rate base some of the investments behind the meter, you know, the answer to what might we want to do might be different. And I think that's indicative of it. There are some things that we need to kind of play out further. So I think where all this is relevant to what we're talking about today, and the issue that I think DeAndre raised, is I think it would be useful for actors who are not the utilities to be able to better understand the constraints that the utilities are observing on the system, to be able to do more sophisticated analysis of their own, to bring more sophisticated recommendations into the DSP process. I don't disagree with what was said earlier about, you know, obviously we're making a change. We're going to start out. There's at some point you got to hit go and you got to get this process rolling. But I think as Jacob said, we will be forever doing DSP planning. You know, we'll be doing one cycle after the next, and I would like to see a process that makes it easier for non-utility actors to have better data and to be able to bring more recommendations into the process. And it's not clear to me. I'm not saying I don't have it right, but it's not clear to me looking at the straw man that the changes that we are making will make it as easy as I would like it to be for non-utility actors to play that bigger role. And this is where I think, you know, some of the comments that we saw from Al, and I appreciated the recommendation from Joyce over at MEA. There may be opportunities to, you know, this is it's the end of my expertise on this, right? And I think that it would be useful from my perspective to see recommendations from other folks who are separate from the utilities, who are presently involved, to, you know, provide additional recommendations to us as a group around how, you know, not saying let's delay what we're agreeing to now for this in this phase of the work group, but for in what I would presume to be future phases of the work group, where we will continue to further evolve all of this. It would be nice to see some additional expertise, offer additional ideas about how we could further evolve what we're landing on here to that end, to make it easier for the group of stakeholders as a whole to understand the constraints, do that kind of analysis, bring some of the kinds of ideas into the fray. And I think that some of that is you know, might result in ideas that, you know, may not work perfectly under the way that we do deal with, you know, what costs can be rate-based and those kinds of issues. And that, you know, it'll prompt us to revisit some of those kinds of things. But I think all of that is going to be healthy for the future of the group.
All right, thanks, Garrett. Don't go anywhere. Jacob.
Yeah, no, I appreciate all those thoughts, Garrett. Not to rehash any of the things from the last phase, but I know during the technical conference, I think it was Paul DiMartini that had brought up the challenges that start to exist as you start to have kind of duplicating analysis, right? And the as you start to have these kind of multiple models or second models, there start to be discrepancies. And so there are real challenges, I think, in terms of, you know, being able to provide that in-depth analysis. And I think he highlighted, and I can certainly look back at some of the specific language, but highlighted the challenges that come with trying to do that. And really, it's the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And so I think what we're looking to do here is really provide, you know, lay out how we're doing our forecasting, right? We're looking to be more transparent in this process. We're looking for input into the data that we're using. We're looking for input onto the assumptions that we're using. And we're looking to lay that out for stakeholders to be able to provide feedback and provide comment. That's why we're looking to publish this, right? And so the idea behind publishing it is to be able to get that feedback from folks, right? And so as we're identifying constraints and as we're identifying potential solutions that we're thinking about, we are looking back to parties for that feedback, right? And I think importantly too, and the commission kind of reaffirmed this, is the utilities ultimately bear the responsibility of this, right? It isn't society that's bearing this. The utilities bear the financial risk of these investments and the distribution and ground ourselves in. And so we're looking to share the plans that we're doing and looking for that feedback from parties and looking to incorporate that feedback. That's how we've designed this kind of process that we're proposing, is being transparent as we're building the analysis, putting it out there for parties to provide feedback, and for the utilities to incorporate that feedback and iterate on the process.
Garrett, is there another step or point where you see, to try and incorporate, some of the suggestions you had, or, to say to the utilities, hey, did you think about X, Y, and Z before they publish the plans? Is that what you're thinking, or?
This is where the specifics of my I have good specific recommendations for you. I suppose read it as a very positive step forward. I don't want to undermine that at all, Jacob. I very much agree. I think we're making very good strides here. And I feel like there probably are additional ways to make that easier for some of these folks, and appreciating the constraints that Jacob just mentioned. And I think I think it continues to be important to figure out how to bring, the input that we want to get from non-utility stakeholders. Inherently, they're doing some analysis to come up with the input that they offer, right? It can't just be assumed that they'll have some brief qualitative thing to say, right? And that's all we can get. So I think what I would like to see most is a commitment to continue to evolve this based on as we move forward with the steps that are proposed here. And we're going to learn more from the stakeholders who are involved in each stage, where they would have liked to have more information and would have liked to be able to have more time to do something to kind of iteratively be part of the process. And I think probably we're only going to learn through doing, where there might be opportunities to tweak what's here as we move forward. I bet folks who have some expertise in this, who studied how utilities do these kinds of plans and would bring that perspective, could help us be smarter about this, as Joyce had recommended. I appreciate there may not actually be time to bring that in now, but as long as we have some commitment to bringing in, to do some continuous learning on that in the future, I'm comfortable with us moving in the direction that we're moving. I think what we're doing here is clear steps forward from the way processes worked in the past.
Great. All right. Thanks, Garrett. And I think it's fair to say that whatever we come up with out of this work group in regards to the template or other things, we're certainly not etching these in stone. I'm sure it'll be a learning process. I'm sure there will be tweaks and changes, over the years from, they just based on whatever the commission rules in the order to the technical conference that comes down the pike. So I think everybody is, drinking the same Kool-Aid as you, Garrett. So I think we're good on that point. I think so. And Jacob's at least nodding. So DeAndre.
I was just going to highlight real quick.
Oh,
Very much
okay.
agree, Garrett. It's an iterative process, and even one of the things we include in terms of what we'd be publishing is what were lessons learned and process improvements from that previous cycle. So very much agree, it's a iterative process.
DeAndre, you had your hand up, sir?
Yes. I just want to first reiterate Garrett's sentiment in regards to the work that utilities are doing. We don't want to, we don't want to belittle the work that they are doing, but we're all trying to get to a certain point or a certain space where we're satisfying the commission's orders and utilities are happy or grounded in what improvements or changes they'll be making in order to accommodate that. It's very easy for us to lose focus of what the vision is when we see the level of investment that's involved with when we talk about non-wire solutions and DERs and other renewable distributed energy resources. The focus is reduction of GHG emissions. And even though some of the solutions are faster and may directly resolve the constraint, the goal is to have a cleaner system. So sometimes we'll have to, or the idea is to use cleaner resources in order to address these constraints. Even if that price tag may be a little higher, if there are other benefits that come with using these other alternative solutions, then that's kind of where we want to go. And the commission is aware of the level of investment that's involved with using these alternative solutions because, one, they've started a benefit cost analysis work group where they're examining where they're examining how to evaluate these solutions that may be costly, but provide other societal benefits, customer benefits, and other types of benefits that come with using these other solutions. The commission also has provided the opportunity for utilities to submit or recommend PIMs, performance incentive mechanisms, meaning to try to bridge the gap between the level of investment that's involved with using some of these cleaner solutions and the utilities rate of return, or how a utility may continue to be profitable while making these large investments and protecting the ratepayer. So we're examining all three of these different mechanisms in order to try to accommodate the large investment that's involved with these clean solutions. But we can't lose sight of creating the ultimate goal of creating a cleaner grid. That's the ultimate goal, reducing GHG. So
I have a question.
Yes.
Andre, are you saying the commission wants us to contract for solar? Add that into our non-wire solutions?
Say it again, I'm sorry.
Are you saying, you're talking about greening the grid, adding more clean energy. Are you saying the commission is supportive of utilities owning, constructing solar?
I don't think you said that.
Nah, I don't know if I don't believe I said that, and I definitely can't speak for the commission.
Yeah.
Okay, because that would be the, storage is carbon neutral. It takes it depends on when it charges and discharges what the mix is. But, green energy, green solutions would come from renewable energy.
Well,
and we are currently deregulated and can't own that, but I'm happy to have that conversation.
Yeah, well, that's what they're currently exploring in these other work groups. Because from what I see now being worked in the energy storage work group is where there is an opportunity for utilities to own storage under that program. That
storage, but not solar.
It could possibly be generation.
Well, I mean, storage takes in generation and releases it, time shifts it.
Right.
And it depends on, so if depending on what the mix is from PJM when you charge, that's what you discharge. And there is a delta between, what then when it discharged, what was on the mix on the PJM system then. And depending on how you do it, you may actually result in increasing the carbon intensity on the system if you discharge in the wrong way. So, but if you want to assure clean energy, then, if we could add those into our solutions, storage always works better with on-site generation with it, renewable generation. That would be definitely an arrow in our tool in our toolbox that would allow us to better approach the commission's goals if the goal is for us to be increasing the amount of green energy on the system.
And we have several work groups that are having all of these discussions, and these opinions are definitely welcome to be discussed in those work groups.
I'm in those too, and I'm just putting it out there to this one.
Okay, all right.
You're talking big policy type issues, maybe even legislative issues that might be a bit beyond our scope. So, but I hear you. So, all right. Do we have anybody else want to weigh in on the template? I got a couple questions, but I don't want to. Samantha, you were actually just the person I was going to call on you if you didn't raise your hand.
Oh, great. Thanks, Judge. Well, hello. I had just some clarifying questions on the template. And I apologize if these have been addressed already. I've struggled to make it to this meeting for the past couple weeks. But I wanted to ask about the proposal to put together a DSP every 3 years I think it says at a minimum. Do you envision alignment in any way with the multi-year rate plans or, multi-year rate planning process, which I think is also 3 years? Or put differently, how do you expect the timing of these plans to align with those things?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it's certainly complicated right now in Maryland in terms of some parties have MYPs, some don't. And there's the whole lessons learned process going on currently, I believe, on MYPs. So I think ideally, there's a way and a structure where this starts to align in some capacity with this in an appropriate way, but it might be too early to address that, just recognizing not everyone's operating under MYPs. And so there might be some needed flexibility for the different utilities based on just kind of what their timing of rate cases are.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you. Then the other question I had about this, the template is, will there be, or do you envision there being a narrative or some discussion about plans for improving forecasting, for example? Okay.
Yeah. As part of the published thing, we have one of the sections being a utility roadmap, and the idea there is it's a narrative where we're talking about how we're continuing to improve the planning process, what current capabilities exist, and how we're looking to potentially improve that. As I kind of mentioned at the beginning, I think there's probably a lot of overlap between what the utilities would be putting in there with what the utilities would be reporting to the commission to support the commission's reporting to the General Assembly about how utilities are meeting their 12 goals. So I see a lot of overlap between those two sections, but yes, the intent would be utilities are talking about in some capacity capabilities and where they're looking to go.
Great. Okay.
Samantha,
and then,
if you look at page 3 of the reporting template, we actually have a sample narrative of how BG&E is going to be improving its forecasting.
oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Okay. Where do I see that? Maybe I'm looking at the wrong version. Okay. Sorry.
It's in the don't think they're getting confusing. This is in the reporting template, not the straw man. We have two documents out there right now.
Aha. Okay. Thank you. I have opened the wrong thing. I appreciate that. Well, I bet I could answer some of my own questions if I looked at the reporting template, huh? Okay, well, thank you. The last question I have, and maybe this answers my question, is at what point, within this group, are we discussing what goes into the DSP itself? Maybe my question is this proposal is now the time? I've lost the thread here, and I don't know if others have as well.
In terms of what's published within the DSP, like the published DSP, is that what you're asking?
Yes,
about?
exactly. I see that in the template, for example, there's some bullet points listed, but I'm curious about kind of the details underneath those, and I'm trying to figure out when the appropriate time to talk about those would be, because I have a bunch of questions about those, but don't want to go that direction if that's not where we're at.
I think now's an excellent time.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think
that's just me.
Okay.
In the straw proposal, under step 4, under step B is like where we listed what we had envisioned of what would be included in the published distribution system plan.
Yes. Okay, I see that. Yes, that's exactly what I was looking at. And so this is where I think a lot of the devil is in the details, and I am interested in understanding, for example, wait a minute. Here's what I want to know. Do you envision the DSP including information about grid needs, and what are the categories of grid needs that you anticipate discussing, and how do you define those? You don't have to answer this right now. I'm just trying to explain that this is where I think this is a really important conversation to be having. I think, obviously I work for a solar industry trade association. I think one of the things we're interested in understanding is how the distribution planning process will help ensure that there's enough hosting capacity to interconnect more DERs in general over time. And, when I look at the distribution system planning process across states. That's the thing that really makes or breaks whether the grid gets oversaturated with solar and then nobody can interconnect anymore. So I think that's where these questions are coming from is, is this part of these plans? Will there be an opportunity to, take your load and DER forecast and make plans about grid upgrades that might be needed in the future? So that's what I mean when I say grid needs, but I wanted to clarify how you all are thinking about that piece.
Yeah, and certainly I can give my perspective. I would certainly lean on any of the SMEs from the teams that are on that want to weigh in. But I think as you look at the commission's order and kind of where they're viewing things, I think grid needs naturally incorporates some level of hosting capacity. I think as we've talked about in the previous phase, there's a desire to include DER forecasting as a piece within hosting capacity analysis, and so all those things start to feed together. And so I think as you think about long-term, broad-scale future view of it, I think at least my thought with that grid needs would be inclusive of hosting capacity. I think that's laid out by the order, by kind of the J process map, by what had been discussed before. Obviously, it's certainly going to be a process in order for the utilities to get to that point, and also kind of just in general within Maryland shifting to a more proactive hosting capacity approach versus how things have historically been in terms of that structure. And obviously all of that shift also interacts with other working groups, right? That certainly connects back to the interconnection working group, so certainly alignment there. So I guess my thought quickly is like, yes, I would expect that to be there, but it may also be one of those that there's a transition time to get to implementing that in a kind of full idealized version way. I don't know if any of the SMEs from our team want to weigh in, and if I misspoke there, but that's kind of how I would think about it.
Okay. I do think that it's really important for this group or stakeholders in general to understand what's included in, quote unquote grid needs. Since I think that's not an intuitive thing necessarily. Obviously I just talked about hosting capacity, but the other reason grid needs are important is because they relate to potential non-wire solutions opportunities, right? So if, for example, the utility identifies that there's a reliability concern in an area, that might be a potential for a non-wire solution. And I say that because that's how I've seen this work elsewhere. And I know we just had a long conversation about NWSs, but my point is that I think clarity around what grid needs are being assessed would be really helpful. Is it capacity? Is it voltage? Is it reliability, resiliency? And then from there, what are the utilities' planned investments to address those grid needs? And I know that, talking about planned investments is different from cost recovery. That's important, right? But those are the kinds of things that I think is important to see as part of a plan, right? So that folks understand, what do you project the needs are going to be? How do you think we might meet those in a way that aligns with state goals, et cetera? And I think without that definition of grid needs, all this is a little bit murky. The other piece I wanted to ask about is things around methodologies. So there's two there's a lot of technical components to this, but the two that are top of mind for me is one, how are you putting together your forecast? That's one. Two is, what does your hosting capacity analysis methodology look like? And I'm wondering where in the process that will be discussed. Maybe it's in writing, maybe it's during a technical conference.
Hi, Sam. To my mind, that is step one and step two of the process that we outline, where we do data collection and we take stakeholder feedback on what kind of data that they're looking for and how we can improve our data. And so, to my mind, that is included in what we do here. And then, of course, at the end stage, getting that final feedback when we publish our plans. But when we say constraints, we are generally talking about both load and hosting capacity constraint. And also reporting on our improvement to hosting capacity maps is part of this CSNA requirements that will be in the reporting that we do going forward, so that you will be able to see what we are doing and respond there when those reports are published, and make the comments that you would like to improve there as well, and we will react to that too. So,
sure. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Sorry.
No. Are you more looking to have a kind of a bird's eye view or access to the analysis that the utility is running in step 3, so that, for example, a solar developer could say, all right, I think this is a good solution for this. Please consider it before the utility issues their plan in step 4?
I'm more thinking, I could see some folks being interested in that. I think what I'm interested in is understanding how and whether utilities are factoring in a forecast of DER growth when they're doing distribution system planning, and what that forecast looks like. And so, in other words, I think what the reason I asked this question is because, I read step 1 and I said, okay, this is all about the inputs. My question is more around methodology, meaning like, okay, you've got some inputs. What are you doing with those? How are you using them to generate a forecast? And I'm not asking for you to, give me all the data. I don't need that. I want to understand what you think load and generation is going to look like, and how does it change over time?
Yeah,
because that feeds into the, are we upgrading the grid sufficiently to support more solar growth? And so I can kind of take your forecast and compare it to what we think is going to happen, so that me, or i.e. stakeholders, can kind of gut check those assumptions.
Yeah, and I think that's what we have laid out in step 2, and I can reshare my screen if it's helpful. But I mean, that's the conversation we want to have with stakeholders before we even run the process, right? We want to be able to define what data are we including as inputs, what assumptions in terms of adoption rates are we making, what like technological or operational characteristics or performance assumptions are going into this methodology. And having that conversation before we even run the analysis. So that's the whole focus of step 2, is to be able to publish kind of what we're thinking in terms of like the assumptions and adoption rates and things that are feeding into their forecast. So that way, ideally we can hash out, get some of that feedback, then incorporate it where appropriate into the forecast that we then produce. So that way, by the time you get to the other side of the forecast, you're not going back and questioning those inputs and assumptions, because we already had that conversation. So that's the whole focus of step 2. We agree having that conversation super valuable, and making that transparency there. And so that's really what we're focused on there.
Got it. And I clearly have not internalized all of this, but I think the other piece there, though, is, over what time frame, for example, is that forecast looking? And again, this is why I think what I'm really asking for is just like a little bit more detail around methodology. I see, you've got scenarios that are 10 years, but it's just, I'm not sure. Is there a more near-term look as well, for example?
Go ahead, Ethan. You want to jump in? Well, I know I guess it was probably the second phase of this. there was talk of doing, I guess, a near, mid, and long-term plans. That's still the case, right, Jacob?
Hi, sorry, I had to get back
Okay.
to my desk. Shooing a cat. So yeah, we do shorter term forecasting and for more near-term constraints, the seasonal forecasting. But the 10-year forecast is where you're going to see the kind of constraints where we can take in, the near term is stuff we have to get to immediately. And with with construction times, permitting, that has to be dealt with in real time. And that is also going to be you mentioned our MYPs earlier, that's going to be in our MYP, known projects that are already out there that we're already putting O&M into. It's the longer term, the far term, out past 3 years is where you're going to find the most opportunity for developers and others to come in and address constraints. And so, yes, there are shorter term. There is also going to be, at least at BG&E, we're moving to a 15-year forecast in order to really look out further to see what the larger, what we can prepare for in the long run. And so you're going to actually get a broader view from than just a near term. And again, I really want to reiterate, those near-term constraints are not the ones that are most amenable to non-wire solutions. As a matter of fact, the way non-wire solutions work, they're the least amenable to being addressed that way. That doesn't mean that they aren't amenable to being addressed by DERs, but you have to remember, DERs are an input to the forecast. Non-wire solutions are an outcome of the identification of how to address constraints and may incorporate DERs. And so keeping those two separate and understanding how one goes in and the other comes out, it can be important. I hope that helped, Samantha.
It does. And I think my last question, and then I'll stop, just whatever.
You're fine. Take your time.
But my last question for now is, so, kind of the other side of that coin, right? I just asked about what's your timeline for forecasting? The other side of that coin is, what's your timeline for looking at grid needs? Are you looking at them 10 years from now, or are we looking at them every year between now and 10 years from now?
We annually reassess with every forecast, and with every short-term and long-term forecast, we are reassessing our systems.
And I guess my question, though, is, will that be in the plan?
It will be what the plan is based on, I guess, is what I think the answer is.
So will your DSP include, I guess, a near, mid, and long term? Is that kind of what you're asking, Sam?
Yes. Yeah, I'm asking what's in the DSP, not what your internal process is.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what we had talked a lot about during the last phase, and I think where we landed was, as Ethan said, as you get closer and closer to the near term, there are certainly challenges in terms of just executing and projects already in motion. And so really focusing more on the mid and long term, where there is more of that flexibility, and really focusing on what solutions have an advanced really towards that execution phase, as Ethan talked about, and where there's that opportunity for that feedback to be incorporated into that project implementation. And so I think that, as we had talked about, is really focusing on that mid and long term, where there's that flexibility to incorporate that feedback in terms of solutions, right?
Sure. And so are you saying that information on mid and long-term grid needs will be in the plan?
Yeah, I think that's kind of how we had framed it in terms of what system constraints are new since the last plan, right? So that's really focusing on that mid and long term, and then what are those potential solutions for those grid constraints that we're thinking about? So that, is going to be really primarily around the mid and long term.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I've got just a couple of clarifying questions I actually have a few. Just in terms of just the process for my own benefit, and Sam kind of triggered it. So the reporting process on page 3, it says proposed reporting process is completed at a minimum of every 3 years. So are you envisioning, say, starting year 0 is 2025, the first plan would be filed in 28? Or is this, do you envision like an annual process where you're just always updating your plans, if that makes sense?
This had
Yes.
been
Go ahead, Ethan.
we had left that open because different utilities have different processes, and with
Right.
the MYPs and SMECO having a very different situation from the rest of us, we had intentionally left that open and something that the individual utility would have to work out with its individual stakeholders, and that leaving that open for the commission can still make the decision it makes, but we were trying as much as possible to acknowledge utility diversity, especially when it comes to having SMECO at the table and not give them a process that they couldn't support.
Right. I think after the last phase, I was under the impression, probably possibly mistakenly, and I haven't gone back and looked at our report, that this was going to be like an annual process, and and just things would be constantly being amended. But it doesn't sound like that's what at least your impression was, Ethan.
PG&E wants to do an annual process. Let me put it that way.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. All right. Well, at least I wasn't too far off the boat there. In terms of the steps, when you talked about issuing an RFP for a particular constraint or problem or solution, where does that happen? Like, what step do you see that happening in? Like,
I see it as outside of this process.
Outside of the process, okay.
An RFP would come from we have arrived at a final plan. Once we've published what our plan is, then RFPs happen for, RFPs are expensive and time intensive. And so we would do them for, it's part of the project planning process and implementation. That happens then in the stage after we've taken in all the feedback and published our plan, then we move forward.
Okay. All right. So in your DSP plan, you would say, hey, Samantha, we've got this constraint over here. We need some solar. Here's an RFP. Okay. So that would happen in step 4. Okay. I was trying to work that through.
Yeah.
All right. If folks have other questions, jump in. I know Al had suggested the inclusion of PIMs somewhere in the DSP process. I don't think I saw it anywhere. I know it's probably more of a rate case, or at least it has been a rate case type issue so far.
I would say that PIMs are going to be programmatic. And
Did you say programmatic or problematic?
Programmatic.
Okay. I was kidding. I know what you said.
They are difficult, however.
Okay.
We are interested in PIMs. We're going to be proposing them for various programs to meet, creating the goals that, that's one of those things we're going to have to work out. But it's going to be proposed. We're going to see PIMs proposed probably in Drive, in other programs that are coming out from the various work groups. Okay. I'm not sure what a DSP PIM would look like. If someone has a recommendation, we're currently thinking about what storage PIMs would look like. John Borkowski has made it known that he's interested in us, promoting some kind of a PIM on storage and storage deployment. That's, those are the kind of internal discussions we're having right now. Okay. Among several others that are going on, like transmission, gas coordination, and
that leads me to my next question. I think I was hoping to see something in the template about how electric utilities are coordinating with gas, and I realize it's BGE is a little bit different than everybody else. Not that necessarily makes it any easier, but you guys are all in-house.
Can I go off camera now?
All right.
I'll say we've started some internal discussions, starting to kind of think through that and what we think is achievable and what makes sense. So we didn't incorporate it yet in the straw proposal. I think it's worth having kind of conversations specific on that topic and kind of getting alignment there, and then seeing where best that may fit into the straw proposal. So I think that's one that more discussions to be had before identifying where it could be incorporated.
Sure. Now, and when you're talking more discussions, are you talking about Pepco and Washington Gas, or within this work group?
I mean, certainly we'll start there, but I think it eventually balloons up right
Sure.
into a broader conversation.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Damon. Damon, if you're talking, we can't hear you. All right. I'll come back to you, Damon.
Sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
Technical difficulties, as always, it seems. I was just going to say that question has also been posed and is being discussed in the context of Empower. So just be mindful of that as well. And
Sure.
talk about gas. It's a much broader issue. It's not just natural gas. It's propane, it's diesel, it's everything, oil, everything else that goes into the mix of when you think about energy transformation. So it's a much larger question. Engagement is happening, I can tell you, at SMECO, but it is at the early stages of thinking through how best to do so, because we have a number of alternative fossil fuel providers
Sure.
our service territories. So it is a much larger question, particularly when you think about planning, because it impacts a lot of small businesses. It's not just the big businesses like BGE or Washington Gas. It's the small propane delivery companies. And so there's a number of companies and outfits that are implicated and impacted by such a process. If the goal is obviously ultimately to phase them out. I mean, if that's really what we're talking about, to be blank, then that's a difficult discussion to have.
No, yeah. No, I'm not necessarily suggesting that's what will or should happen. I was just trying to figure out how to include the coordination point is all. DeAndre.
Yes. This is to the utilities and I guess Jacob and Ethan. In regards to the strawman, between steps 3 and 4, and I think this kind of touches on Samantha's concerns. I just want to reiterate that the commission has approved the acceptance or the proposal of upgrade plans, which pertain to any hosting capacity upgrades that the utilities can propose to the commission in order to increase the hosting capacity with regions, feeders, and address any restricted or closed feeders as well. So within that analysis, I see hosting capacity analysis like in step 3, grid needs. Somewhere in this analysis, you all can determine if and where you may want to propose or present a upgrade plan to a region in order to address DER integration. And then in 4, I guess you would be publishing that or bringing making the actual proposal as to where you all may want to make upgrades in order to address DER integration. Just another tool in your toolbox.
Agree, DeAndre. And again, always being mindful in these conversations of like what's the long-term view of this and what's like the near-term view of this. Very much agree, like that's certainly a part of this in terms of long-term view, hosting capacity analysis, proactive addressments, I think fit into this, and that fits into the grid constraints in this whole process. I think very much supportive of that, but also recognizing that may not be where we're at today, right? MCAM is a beast in itself to try and implement, right? And that doesn't even start to get into the proactive planning for it. So very much agree, DeAndre, that is part of that kind of ideal version of this process and would be a part of step 3 bleeding into step 4.
Okay, thanks.
Ethan, you're unmuted. Do you have anything to say, sir? Or
No, I had to step away, honestly.
no, it's okay. No worries. No worries at all. Anybody from the gas utilities on today?
Well, technically I am.
Well, okay. Well, I'll pick on you then. Do you have any, just, I don't know if you've even considered it, any thoughts as to where in this, in the straw man, the gas utilities may figure in? I mean, probably. I mean, I'm sure it'll be throughout.
I think they would just have to be considered another technical stakeholder.
Hmm.
You know, we haven't had the opportunity to do much conversation about what kinds of outreach would happen cross utility. Obviously, internally for BG&E, I can have a meeting, but you know, we do have plans for including a geothermal pilot that we're putting forward. You know, we are looking to incentivize customers fuel switching. So, you know, these are the things that we are doing, but the fact remains that right now we have both continued growth in gas usage from our customers and an obligation to serve. And so when a customer asks us for a gas, you know, that's what we have to do.
No. Again, I get it, and I'm not trying to say that you should or shouldn't do that. I'm just trying to address, you know, what the commission had said about gas and electric planning coordination. That's all I'm trying to get at here.
Absolutely, and it's just we are going to have to spend some time on that internally. Quite honestly,
and I get it. It's not an easy issue, you know, obviously for BGE, but for the other gas utilities as well. Damon.
Yeah, just to continue that line of discussion, I mean, I think this is where there's still a gap that we really do need direction from the commission on as to what the end goal is here. You know, what's the policy direction from a planning perspective? Are we factoring in a phase out of fossil fuels across the board by a date certain, or whatever it may be? We can't plan to an unknown, and I think that's part of the struggle for probably all of us, even the gas companies. Coordination has to be with an end in mind. And so what are we coordinating towards effectuating? And I think that's the gap that's still out there that we do need policy direction on.
Right. Understood. Whether or not that's going to come or where it's going to come from, I don't know. But, you know, I hope we can just at least get the conversation rolling in our 11/15 filing. My guess is I'm pretty confident we're not going to thread the needle and give them exactly what they want, but hopefully we can, like you said, at least continue the conversation. Mark.
Also, and I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Damon.
To finish one thought, because
Sure.
I know you mentioned things like PIMS, and I'm sure it's probably obvious, but when you think about SMECO, PIMS obviously aren't a consideration for us. We have nothing to incent in that regard. So it is an area where we have to be mindful of the differences between the utilities. Our planning processes will be very different from the perspective of we have no interest in speculative build. We are reactive in that sense. We want to be mindful of certainly constraints that pop up on our system, and we'll look to resolve them proactively. But right now we don't have the types of constraints that others may be struggling with. And so there are differences there. And again, incentivizing returns have no place in our world. So just that needs to be thought through as well.
No, I understood completely. I don't think that there's necessarily a PIN mandate or anything like that. And I think the commission recognizes everybody's differently situated. So, Mark.
Thanks, Judge. Good morning, everybody. Mark Zuka from Potomac Edison. Just want to mostly second what Mr. Krieger just said about coordination with the gas companies. So Potomac Edison has 3 natural gas distribution companies in our territory, only one of which is represented on this call. Did some very preliminary discussions with them. I think where we see this is like it would be in the input section. we would be basically getting information from the gas companies as to where they see potentially their customers or their gas load transitioning to electric. But I guess at this point, just based on a voluntary communication, I don't expect we're going to get anything. I don't expect we're going to get them coming back saying, yeah, we're encouraging our customers to electrify in these areas, and therefore you should expect it. So I guess I know we can't direct the commission, but I mean, I think I would second the suggestion that if we're going to get useful information from the gas companies, it's most likely going to have to come as a commission directive, either through us or directly.
All right, thanks, Mark. Appreciate the input. And appreciate the efforts, the coordination efforts, at least starting the conversations. All right, anybody else? Yeah, go ahead, DeAndre.
Yes, thank you. My question is more so as it pertains to the regulatory proceedings, proposals or charts that were sent out. I wanted to ask the utilities more about, get some feedback from them in regards to the technical conference. Staff originally posted a chart or model where the technical conference was a little earlier in the process, in the DSP process, and utilities are proposing something a little later. So I just wanted to get some feedback from them as to how or why or in regards to how how is a later technical conference more accommodating for them? What do they see coming out of this technical conference, and why something earlier in the process to address more so the steps and analysis being performed prior to the publishing of the DSP would not be feasible, or they see that not being more feasible?
Yeah, sure. I can take this one. I think, first, easiest answer, what we put forward with the process map aligns with the straw proposal that we had modified to include the technical conference. So that's the easiest answer, right? The idea is we're aligning those two things that we are kind of putting out there. I think, I want to make sure as we're talking about this, when we talk about publishing the DSP, it's about publishing the plan, right? It's a plan, and it's a iterative plan that can be evolved and reshaped based off of feedback. So, as we've been thinking about this, that step 4 in that publishing the plan isn't us putting forward this final thing that is there and is concrete. It's us publishing what our plan is and are looking then for feedback from participants. And I think we have the technical conference where we have it, so that way we can really have a conversation about everything, right? If we're having it earlier, that means that there are going to be steps that are happening that we're then not having a conversation at a technical conference about, right? So by having it after the utilities have kind of published what that initial plan is, including those steps that already had stakeholder engagement, it gives us the opportunity to reflect back on the constraints that were identified, on those solutions, and have conversations around those things. Versus earlier in the process, you're either needing an additional technical conference to follow it up later in the process, or you're having kind of some of these additional steps. And as we've been thinking about it, the reality is this process takes time, right? Most of these annual planning processes are generally already year-long processes, right? So looking to incorporate these aspects of it are important, and we want to make sure we're doing so in a way that is efficiently structured, that allows stakeholders sufficient time during each step to be able to actually participate. I forget if it was Samantha or Garrett, I apologize, earlier made the good point of during each of these steps, stakeholders need sufficient time to be able to participate. And so by, putting the technical conference where it's at after the plan, it allows that, I think, to efficiently kind of fit into the utility processes. And so, again, really thinking of this as an iterative cycle and less so a concrete plan we're putting out there. And so that's kind of why we put the technical conference where we did.
Okay. Well, just to follow up, do you see anything coming out of the technical conference that may take you back to step 1 or 2, having to just revisit your whole DSP process, or do you see that as just addressing some later boxes or phases of the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would certainly hope that step 1 and step 2, since we're having direct stakeholder engagement there, that's already being accounted for. But there's certainly, I would say, a possibility that depending on the feedback or the order, if the commission is to issue a specific order on something, that part of the process may have to be reevaluated. But the hope is that we're having sufficient stakeholder engagement throughout that. We're not running into that concern. And again, it's an iterative process, right? These things are only changing in iterative ways year over year. So the expectation is that, what they're seeing 1 year is going to be built off of what they've seen the previous year. And so we're not, wildly or drastically changing things. And so it really gets back to it's a cycle, right? And so the technical conference is our point to be able to check in on it.
Okay, yeah, I understand. My only concern was that if we had an earlier technical conference, that would probably or hopefully be able to capture any need to revisit any of these other prior steps earlier in the process, so that the later steps in the process will be a little bit more solidified. But I guess it probably works either way or both way from my understanding, or how you understand it. From my understanding of how you understand it.
Yeah, and I'd be curious people's perspective. I mean, we thought it would be valuable that the constraints and potential solutions are part of the discussion at the tech conference, and where folks are able to weigh in on those and provide feedback there. Because I think as it was originally outlined, the technical conference, or as DeAndre, I think you had kind of initially built it out, the technical conference was before the constraints and before the solutions. And so I think that was a topic that we thought would be beneficial to have as part of the technical conference. But if folks think otherwise, I'd be curious to hear.
Looks like you've stumped everyone. I want to just kind of follow up or maybe clarify something. Samantha put in the chat about the FERC order that referenced stakeholder processes with an assumptions meeting, a needs meeting, and a solutions meeting. And I know you've obviously got step 2's assumptions. I would think that, and this just may be more nomenclature, and you've labeled it a little bit differently. And a solutions meeting would, I guess, probably the actual DSP plan. Did you have any thoughts as to where, and I'm not saying you have to label the meetings as the same as the FERC order did, but I mean, do you think the needs meeting is the one that kind of jumps out at me as to maybe not being specifically defined?
Yeah, and so the FERC document's a long document, so I've only started reading some of it. But as I was kind of reading through in terms of those 3, I think certainly I think we see publishing that plan as kind of addressing both the needs and the needs and the solutions at the same time. Just kind of capturing those there, and again recognizing it's an iterative solution. Some of these things are going to be there year to year, and really seeing benefit on collecting the data up front that would help kind of inform the plans. And so I think there's a lot of alignment with kind of what we had put forward here with what FERC is also looking to do at the transmission level. I think it's just slightly structurally different of, looking to kind of hit the needs and the solutions kind of at once in one step, and then adding a step around data collection.
All right, thank you,
Yeah.
sir. Go ahead, Ethan.
I had I did get to those paragraphs that Sam is referencing, and my takeaway from being a full FERC person and coming from transmission was that it reflects the much longer timelines that transmission construction will have, where we're looking at a tight iterative process for annual planning and construction beginning like at the beginning of the next year. And so that's again goes to the iterative process we're going to be doing, where these will happen as the years go by, where when you've got a 2 to 3 years of discussion of FERC filings to get a transmission plan, PJM stakeholder processes that go on forever. It's just a much larger time frame than what we're talking about for distribution planning.
No, I got it, and I didn't interpret the commission's directive to be you have to do it exactly this way. So I just think they're just trying to just increase the stakeholder participation as much as possible. Samantha.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to just share my thoughts on this as well. I guess, one thing is, I heard earlier, not to belabor this point, but we had a discussion about the time frame that the DSP would cover, right? And my understanding is that it would be focused on the midterm and 10 years from now. So I think this is a forward-looking and long-term kind of plan, right? So to your point, Ethan, I think this isn't like, it sounds like we're not going to be talking about next year in the DSP process, but that's kind of beside the point. I do think that the reason I posted this or pasted this quote in the chat from the order is because, I'm thinking about the annual technical conference process itself, and I can see a lot of these discussions taking a while, and I'm concerned that we might need to think about breaking it up a little bit, and I do think it's sort of logical to focus on the assumptions, needs, and solutions. And I'm not saying that that's not what you propose, but I guess all of this is to say that I think this is I like this approach because I think it makes the whole plan itself more digestible, right? This is a lot, and there's a lot of detail here. So I think it would be great to break it up into at a minimum 3 pieces. So assumptions, needs, and solutions, in my opinion. I don't know if we can get to all those things in one day. So I wanted to throw that out there, but we can cross that bridge when we come to it.
Well, I think we're at the bridge, or if we're not, we're quickly approaching it. And I would note that at least the straw man as it's drafted now has a data collection meeting or phase where the FERC order did not. So does that you could even throw that possibly in its needs. Did you have any thoughts on that as being useful, or are you suggesting
that's a good point. I think that could get to the assumptions piece, that the data collection and assumptions seem to be certainly related.
Right. Yeah. And again, I'm not saying, it's not a bad idea. I'm just thinking off the top of my head and align the inputs and assumptions. Doing that, is that kind of needs? I don't know. It might be a distinction without a difference. But
I would say it's not. No, I think to me, needs are based on comparing your forecast to your existing grid infrastructure, whatever. That's in like layman terms. And so the needs are sort of an output of the analysis. So that would come after you've got your forecast down.
Right. And this kind of takes me back to, I think, what DeAndre was kind of saying. I don't know if there needs to be like another step, like a 3A after the analysis, but it sounds like you kind of want to, are you wanting to see the results of the analysis in step 3 before the plan is published in step 4? Or do you want to have like a meeting on that? I'm just thinking, I'm just trying to figure out what you're looking for here.
If I may,
Yes, please.
I would encourage people who want an adjustment to the straw man. That's why we originally proposed it as a straw man for people to take their crayons to and mark up and draw what they want out of the process. And we've gone back to the drawing board now. I think we're on iteration. Yeah, we are now on the process from in version 2.6, and we've really gone far to try to find what you want. Please go ahead and add your own bullet points, add a new step in, show us what you want, and we can. That would be much easier for us to discuss.
Fair point. Fair point. All right, Sam, is that something you're willing to do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm willing to do that. Before I do that, I'm asking clarifying questions. So
Sure, no, that's fine. No, I
right?
get it.
So, this is not at the, needs a discussion, in my opinion, and I don't want to spend a bunch of time redlining something when maybe I don't need to.
Sure.
So, I don't know if there needs to be another step in the process here. I think what I was going to say in response to your question, Judge, is that I don't know that we need to see the needs in advance. I think what we need to do is make sure that we all agree on a very detailed framework for what the plan should include and how the needs should be determined. And if as long as the framework is something we can all agree on and is detailed enough that we all understand it, I think it's fine to see the output after the fact, right? So in other words, I think maybe what I think we're kind of getting at is, maybe there's an assumptions meeting or related to step 1 or 2 or whatever it is, where we talk about inputs to the forecast and what the forecast looks like. After the plans come out, we look at the needs and the solutions. And so maybe that's 2 events, so to speak. That's one.
Right,
one
and I think that's what Jacob was kind of envisioning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the idea there is, especially anchoring the technical conference right after it. I mean, I think by putting that there, it creates more space and more time, and for folks to be able to evaluate both the needs and the solutions that are identified as part of the plan. And so I think, again, going back to with all this, we're trying to balance making sure stakeholders have enough time to digest it, incorporate it, evaluate it, provide meaningful feedback, still balancing that against the need of the utilities to be able to actually plan, right, and actually execute the planning process. And so I think by combining them and then anchoring them with the tech conference, which I think is a step that's naturally going to have more time built around it before it and after it, in terms of just that general structure, I think it creates that space to be able to talk about both of those things at once.
Does that help at all, Sam?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
That works for me.
Okay. All right. Any other points you want to hit on the template, or?
I have one more.
Go ahead.
Question. I am attempting to reconcile the straw man. That's the process straw man, right? So this is like the process, but there's also the reporting template. And I'm looking, for example, at the things that are included in the process. So sorry, what I'm trying to figure out is what's going to be in the actual plan that gets published. And my sense is that, as we've already discussed, that shows up in the process document on page 7 under what is included in the published DSP. I'm trying to reconcile that with the reporting template, and maybe this is me not understanding what a reporting template means to all of you, but I guess I'm expecting, well, let me rephrase. Is the reporting template the template for the plan, or is this a separate report?
I view them as separate, but that's just me.
Okay.
Sam, you raise a really good point, though. This has been the DSP process that we began discussing before the CSNA came out is to create the points of transparency. And, but back to that's the Jade Road, that was kicked off by Jade Roadmap. The reporting template is a result of the CSNA, which has a very specific directive for the commission to report annually to the legislature about the utilities' progress on projects and programs supporting state goals. And each of the headings in the reporting template is one of those state goals, including, you'll notice that the very last one is to be determined by the commission. So the legislature did leave it open for the commission to add in their own ideas there. So in my mind, the template is, it will be a good starting point for our reporting and level setting everyone. It will, give you a general idea, but the plan itself is going to be more detailed in a different process that goes through the straw man. Now, that's really in my mind, and this is not really a conversation that we've solidly had in this work group yet, is what people want. And there has been some conflation back and forth. So, you raise a really good point.
That's super helpful. Thank you. So that's, that question about like what people want in the plan is the thing that I'm most focused on. And, I will point out that I think we did discuss this quite a bit in the prior phase of the work group. And I'm thinking, for example, of the OPC straw person. I think there was a lot of detail there about what should go into the plan. So I don't know if that's something we can talk through more at our next meeting. In other words, going back to the process straw proposal, again, I'm talking about on page 7, step 4B. So what is included in the published ESP? I think it would behoove us to talk in more detail about what can be included there. And, as I said, I'm happy to provide some thoughts on that part.
Happy to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and like I said before, to the extent folks can put stuff in writing, so Jacob and Ethan and utilities generally can consider it beforehand, so they don't have to kind of speak off the top of their head and then bring something back and then talk about it, a month later. That's beneficial. I think it improves the meetings and improves the work product. So happy to address that again, or happy to address that, in a couple of weeks. But again, to the extent you want something, please put it in writing. It'll just be beneficial to everyone. All right. Anybody else? All right. So looking ahead, it looks like I've got our next meeting will be on the 12th. We may have to start a little bit later, say 11 o'clock, because I've got a pre-hearing conference in another case. So I guess that's actually one good thing. In terms of what we need to cover, though, if you haven't already, I know some folks started talking about gas and electric plan integration. If the utilities could ramp up that, I realize next meeting may be too early to submit some comments on that, but to the extent you can do that, please do so. If folks have changes or suggestions or questions about the template, please submit those by the 5th to the entire work group in writing. Let's see, what else we have. Metrics. That's one thing we didn't talk about. Jacob, Ethan, you guys, or any of the utilities, have you guys started talking about metrics or thinking a little bit more? Because I know we're kind of getting down to the wire. We may have time for 4, maybe 5 meetings before 11:15 is on us.
Yeah, had some initial internal conversations, so more to come there. I don't know if we'll have some by the 5th, the next meeting, but that's something that similar to the gas coordination we're working through.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and to the extent that folks have suggestions on metrics, again, please submit those by the 5th. I think I circulated the results of the OPC metric work group from the last phase. So if you want to use that as kind of a jumping off point, I think that might be useful for everyone. Is there anything else that I haven't hit that we need to, or we need to tee up for next week, or I'm sorry, the 12th? All right. Well, thanks again for being here. I will get out. Oh, you know what? Yes, I just remembered. So all the non-consensus items on the in the report, what I think might be useful especially if we don't have a ton to talk about next week, is to start looking at that and going through and getting rid of things that we don't need anymore. I think a lot of the non-consensus items, not a lot, maybe several, are addressed by the utility straw man, with the whole metric issue with the other work groups. I think we can get rid of a lot of that, but I'm gonna circulate just a draft document. It is not meant to be anything. It's kind of my brief take on what's outstanding in terms of consensus and non-consensus, or I'm not even hitting the consensus items, the partial consensus items. And if I could get some folks to weigh in on those issues, we can address those on the 12th as well. All right. All right. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy your long weekend. Take care.
Sounds good. Thanks, Judge. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a safe weekend, everyone.